Hey guys, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined this week by Matt Karoly from Rise Up Reader. He's been a frequent co-host on the show over the last several weeks, and today we are going to do what we normally do, talk about the Falcons, talk about their most recent win over the Washington Redskins, talk about their upcoming matchup against the Cleveland Browns later this week, and of course, we'll be answering your mailbag questions. So to kick things off, we usually talk about roster moves. Didn't get the opportunity to talk about like Zane Beadle's signing last week due to a great guest we had by the name of Fred Smoot. Shout out to Fred Smoot for talking so much trash on the Falcons last week and being shut up. Looking forward to seeing what he has to say this week. But not going to talk about Zane Beadles. We're going to talk about the possibility of a roster move that everybody's hungering for. None other than former Seahawk, former Oakland Raider, Atlanta native, Bruce Irvin. Matt, what are your thoughts on the possibility that the Falcons will sign Bruce Irvin now that he's cleared waivers today?
So, with Christmas right around the corner, I'm going to be the Grinch for the day and basically burst everyone's bubble and balloon and probably say that I'd put it at like 1% to 2% chance that this happens. For me, I think this isn't 2016 when it kind of made more sense and the pass rush was very lacking and Vic Beasley was just a rookie. But now at this point, we know what Vic Beasley is. We have an idea of what Bruce Irvin is. I mean, it's 2 years later, so Bruce Irvin's now a 30-plus-year-old pass rusher who, again, I mean, I don't understand why we think Bruce Irvin is going to fix the Falcons pass rush. For one, I mean, he's the same player as Vic Beasley, in my opinion. I mean, maybe a marginal upgrade. But as far as talking about a guy that's really probably a Sam linebacker playing as defensive end, that's really what you're getting with Bruce Irvin. So for me, from a football standpoint, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I think if there's ever a pass rusher out there that they need to get, it's someone that has the ability to slide inside in the nickel and give you what Adrian Claiborne basically gave you last year. Not a guy that's going to just play on the edge, going to take away from Beasley snaps, which, again, some people could view that as a positive, but I don't think you're going to get much different from Bruce Irvin that you're going to get from Vic. And then also the money aspect, I'm not sure what he's going to be looking for. I mean, he's a vested veteran that is going to be able to collect the remaining salary that he was owed from Oakland. But at the same time, I still think he's not going to be willing to play for vet min. Now, if he is, then I'd entertain it. And as far as where he would fit, then Falcons have to deactivate one of the starting 4 defensive ends that they have, whether it be Derek Shelby or Brooks Reed. And I just don't feel like they're willing to do that. I mean, one, they guaranteed all of Derek Shelby's salary. Now, it's a sunk cost. They've already paid it. They can accept that, and maybe he's the guy that they deactivate. And that was what I threw out on Twitter as a possible scenario if they did bring Bruce in, and Bruce then would be the 3rd or 4th guy, or maybe, he catapults Vic and is the 2nd guy. But until you see a willingness for them to do that, and I don't see it. That's why, for me, Bruce Irvin, I don't think, or any pass rusher for that matter, honestly, as much as it kind of hurts to say, because they do need pass rush help. That's the one weakness on this team. I just don't see any big names coming through the door anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I probably put the odds at probably closer to 10%, but yeah, I still think the odds are against the Falcons signing Bruce Irvin. The only way it makes sense to me is that they would deactivate the 9th defensive back, which, as I've noted several times on Twitter with my hashtag inactive analysis, every game the Falcons have activated 9 defensive backs this season, they've won games. So they're 4-0 when they've had 9 defensive backs active. They're 0-4 when they have 8 defensive backs active. And really, yeah, you're right. They're not going to deactivate Brooks Reed or Derek Shelby to put Bruce Irvin on the field. And I think generally you're right in terms of what Irvin is at this point. He's basically Vic Beasley. Now, I would say, the case for Bruce Irvin is that he has a little bit of a better repertoire of pass rush moves, but he's probably not as good at any of them to the degree where he can consistently get pressure, to the point that at least in the best case scenario where Vic Beasley's getting that speed rush going, like he can at least use that reasonably effectively. So I think the issue with Irvin is just going to be like the only role he would have really is as, I don't even know if they would play him as a Sam linebacker. It would just basically, they would use him in the same way that they used Dwight Freeney back in 2016 or Tack McKinley last year, as sort of a rotational nickel pass rusher that gets like 15 to 20 snaps a game. And, that could work if the Falcons were down on Vic Beasley or down on Tack McKinley. I know the fan base is down on Vic Beasley, or a significant portion of the fan base is down on Vic Beasley. But I don't think this coaching staff is. And so, the idea of, maybe having Irvin and Beasley rushing on the edge and kicking Tack a little bit more inside where he's had some success makes some sense. But at this time, I just don't think the Falcons are necessarily in the market for that. That could change if, they have a couple more injuries between now and next week. But I think the Falcons are going to sort of wait and see with Irvin, wait and see what his price tag is going to be. I don't think they're going to really be interested in signing him for anything more than a veteran minimum at this point in the season, given it's not a huge. I mean, like, we know the pass rush needs to improve, but I don't know if Bruce Irvin's the guy that's going to do it. So I just feel like, if Bruce Irvin can get a better offer from another team, for $1 million or $2 million to play out the rest of the season, I imagine he'll take it rather than come to Atlanta. So I don't see it as a likely possibility, but it could happen. But I think you would have to have something between now and, say, next week change, and particularly with, one of their 4 defensive ends getting hurt or Devondre Campbell getting hurt, to be a move that the Falcons would seriously entertain at this point.
And, the thing to add about your point about whether they should activate essentially a 4th corner or a 5th corner and how that's worked. I mean, the way their roster has been set up and the way they attacked free agency and all that, I mean, they got a guy like Justin Bethel strictly to play special teams. He's not someone that they really want. I mean, we saw what he did in the preseason. He's not someone they really want to press in for duty on the defense. So he's literally, his sole role on the active 46-man roster is to play special teams. If he's healthy, he's going to be active, and that's his job. Similar for Russell Gage. I mean, they've been activating 6 wide receivers all year strictly because of special teams reasons. I mean, he's the gunner. I mean, he has other roles on special teams. He's a special teams guy, and it just doesn't open many other opportunities for, free agent moves at this point in the season to fit in there. I mean, that's why I brought up, deactivating Shelby or Reed, because again, if their DB room's healthy, they're going to activate the 5 corners because of special teams reasons. They're going to keep the 4 safeties because of special teams reasons. So, whether we like it or not, there's not a lot of wiggle room as far as adding another guy. And I mean, you can bring up, and we're going to talk about it later, as far as they have 2 kickers on the roster and there's some wiggle room there. But, I'm kind of suspecting maybe they're going to IR Matt Bryan. But again, we'll get to that later. But other than that, there's not a lot of wiggle room to add a body to then, suit up on game day and fit in for a guy like Bruce Irvin. So that's kind of the unfortunate way of the way this roster is constructed. And hopefully going forward in 2019, they get guys that can serve both, as a special teams gunner and, somewhere on the offense or the defense. But for right now, they're kind of locked in to these guys the way in their roles. So.
Yeah. Keith Tandy was the only guy that I was thinking about that might be deactivated, because we saw that earlier in the season. And, he is a special teams guy. Yeah, he's gotten like 3 snaps on defense. And because of Brian Poole's versatility, you could sort of use him as the sort of emergency safety in a pinch if you needed a guy to move back there. But yeah, that's the only real reality. And I think the special teams point is a big point where it's like, because Bruce Irvin's not going to play special teams, because he's not going to play the base defense, you have to have sort of a specific role for him in the nickel. And right now, I don't necessarily see the Falcons being in a mindset where they want to take Vic Beasley or Takk McKinley off the field in the nickel. Jack Crawford's playing great. Grady Jarrett's playing great right now. So unless, unless something changes with the status quo where one of those four guys gets nicked up this week, or Brooks Reed or Derek Shelby gets nicked up, and, they decide to start playing one of those nickel guys more in debate, like Crawford goes back to playing defensive end, I don't really see it as a likely possibility. But you never know. Maybe the Falcons will be like, hey, let's get this Bruce Irvin guy and stash him on the roster, and we'll need him in December and in January as opposed to in November. But who knows? Okay, let's move on and let's talk about this this Redskins game. Already ready to move on from the Redskins game, even though it was probably the most entertaining and most impressive win of the season for the Falcons. Matt, what were your thoughts coming out of this game?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not a whole lot that I can complain about in this ballgame. I think this was one of the more complete performances that the Falcons have had since the 2016 season. And I think my biggest takeaway, and the guys that I want to give out a shout out to, is the Falcons' offensive line. Typically, I mean, this matchup scared the hell out of me coming into it. I mean, this is the type of team, the Redskins, teams that can control the line of scrimmage have always given the Falcons a ton of trouble. We saw it, last year in the playoffs with the Eagles. We saw it in the regular season with the Vikings and some of the other matchups. So I was very skittish and unsure of how the Falcons were going to handle that. But, man, the Falcons' offensive line really took this game personally, really took it upon themselves to be the difference makers. And, what they did in the run game, there was a stat, and I was hoping it'd get thrown out there because when you watch it on TV, you can obviously tell that was the case. But there's a stat that was thrown out there that the Falcons averaged about, I think, 4.96 yards before contact on the ground. I mean, that shows you what the offensive line did. That's, it's not, sure, the running backs have to find the hole and have to have the vision, but man, the offensive line was moving those guys. I mean, Deron Payne was quiet. John Allen was very quiet. I mean, those were guys that were balling coming into this game, both against the run and then versus the pass. And Atlanta just shut them down and really controlled the game. That set up the play action, obviously. So yeah, my hat's off to those guys. They really set the tone. And then I guess on the flip side, just talking about, because I wasn't totally concerned about the defense. Obviously, the story all season has been how bad the defense has been. But I thought the type of matchup that the Redskins offered, as far as from their skill positions and what they can do, they weren't an explosive offense. You really had to just shut down the run. And if you could do that and make them play catch up with Alex Smith, I thought that was going to be the blueprint for success, and that's exactly what they did. But, you got to, I think, bring up a little bit their offensive line injuries that just hit them right from the start. I mean, they lost three guys. I think Moses came back, their right tackle. But I think that definitely played somewhat of a role, and they shot themselves in the foot at times with some holding calls, and that may be because they had backups playing. But, I was impressed with the defense. I thought a lot of guys stood out and had some of their better games. I mean, Duke Riley was especially active in his limited role, playing 30 or so snaps. And I think that's perfect for him. And I think, the coaching staff has found that right mix with their linebackers, and hopefully they're getting close to doing the same with strong safety again. Because, Sherrod Niesman, outpaced Jordan Richards in snaps once again. And I was impressed with him, in particular, a couple of the plays when he was matched up with Jordan Reed. I thought he had some good coverage snaps there. So, I mean, all in all, it was a great performance. But my biggest takeaway was just the way the offensive line controlled the Redskins defense line, which was supposed to be their strength coming in. So yeah, that was great to see. Hopefully, we just get that consistently from them, because if that's what they can give us on a week-to-week basis, this team's going to be tough to stop.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not this is one good game in a sea of mediocrity, or this is a sort of a trendsetter where we're going to see this more of these types of offensive line and defensive line performances for the remainder of the season. Because you go back to that week 2 game where they played really well in the trenches and did more to control Carolina's offenses and defensive line than that game than necessarily vice versa. And then they came back the following week against New Orleans and basically crapped the bed. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to watch this week against the Browns. But I do think you're right. Historically, the Redskins have done a very good job of controlling the line of scrimmage when they faced the Falcons in past years. And that was a concern of mine, and one of the reasons why I was a little bit more pessimistic, or a lot more pessimistic than maybe most other people were about this matchup, particularly earlier in the week. And the offensive line stepped up, and you got to give them credit for that. And that's been, really the trench play, in my eyes, has been the biggest liability for this team throughout the season. And it makes their offense a little bit less potent, and it makes their defense a lot more vulnerable. The other thing you'll say is, they did a better job tackling on Sunday. They still missed a bunch of tackles, but it never was so prevalent as it has been in previous games where, simple 6-yard completions turn into 20-yard gains, and you didn't see very many of those on Sunday against Washington. So I think, they played a lot more discipline. They played up to their abilities. They stopped the run, which is something they struggled to do throughout the season, but they've done a good job of that the last 2 weeks. I think a lot of that is owed to the defensive line's ability to get penetration and be disruptive. And as I've been saying all year long, I think when the team is doing a good job up front, particularly on defense, it sort of has a trickle-down effect to the rest of the units, and they can sort of get by even with some of the players at the linebacker position, at the safety position, at the cornerback position that may or may not be playing great football at this point in the season, but certainly, are serviceable if the defensive line is taking care of business. I think that's what the Falcons were able to do, and everything else falls into place. We know Matt Ryan is going to have a good game. We don't always know if the running game is going to be effective, but I think, again, a lot of that is owed to the offensive line's performance this season, as opposed to question marks about the running backs. And we saw them be able to run the ball effectively. We saw them be able to spread the ball around, as they have done pretty consistently outside of maybe 2 games this year. So they checked a lot of boxes on Sunday, and hopefully this is a momentum builder for them, and something that, coming out of the bye week, coming out with some motivation, feeling like, okay, we need to get our act together and we need to start playing our brand of football at this point. Hopefully this will continue, and this just not 1 week or 2 weeks of this and then back to what we saw in that first month of the season, which is a lot of more sloppy football. So that's what I'm looking forward to in the future. And with the future in mind, let's talk about this upcoming week's game against the Browns. The Browns are 2-6-1. I think they've lost 4 straight or something like that, or 4 out of the last 5. And they don't have a great offense. Their defense statistically in several of the, regular categories is low. But then when you look at some other stats, you see a defense that's probably better than this. They're number 2 in defensive passer rating. I think they're like number 7 in terms of points. No, like number 11 in points per drive. And I think number 7 in percentage of drives that end in a score. They're number 1 in takeaways, number 1 in turnover margin, number 9 in third.
Is that with week 9? Is that with week 9 factored in? Because I was looking at the defensive drive stats as well for Cleveland. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they're pretty much in the top 8 of yards per drive, points per drive, turnovers forced per drive.
It's one of those things where it's like, and part of it is owed to the fact that they played 4 overtime games and they've had a lot of drives against them.
Yeah.
So they get some of the cumulative stats against them a little bit that sort of make those, uh, volume stats like yards and points scored look bigger than they actually are. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this basically the point I'm bringing up is this Browns team defense is a little bit better than what they seem to be at face value if you just look at certain metrics. So it'll be interesting to see if they can sort of fare a little bit better against this Falcons offense than other teams have done. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to see. But there are beat up in the secondary. I know Demarius Randall's dealing with an injury, their free safety. Denzel Ward exited last week's game with a hip injury. He's expected to play. Their other starting cornerback, EJ Gaines, was dealing with a concussion. He exited last week's game. Desmond Harrison, their rookie left tackle, missed last week with an illness. He was replaced by Greg Robinson, Tack McKinley's best friend. They're also dealing with an injury to linebackers Joe Sherbert and Christian Kirksey, both dealing with hamstring injuries. So their defense is a little bit beat up, but they do have Myles Garrett. If he's doing Myles Garrett things, and sometimes that can be all you need on defense. But Matt, what are some of the things that you're going to be paying attention to this weekend in this Browns matchup?
Yes, I think there's definitely some things where, you mentioned all the injuries. If their secondary is banged up, Denzel Ward's a big one. If he plays, that Julio versus Denzel matchup will be very fun to watch. Whether it's Desmond Harrison or Greg Robinson, both of those guys are probably one of the worst tackles in the league. So watching Tack get the tee off against one of those guys should be fun, and hopefully, he can get back into the sack column. He's been a little quiet the last couple of weeks. I think the one thing from the Browns offense that scares me, and it's Duke Johnson, and it seemed like they featured him a lot more last week against Kansas City, and it could be, a lot to do with they were playing from behind, but Falcons, it's been well documented, they've struggled with running backs in the pass game. They caught a break last week in Washington, not having to face Chris Thompson, who's one of the best pass catching backs. Duke Johnson's right up there with him. So whoever they decide to start on him in man coverage, that should be a matchup that is probably going to be favoring the Browns. As far as some of their other skill players, though, I'm not too concerned about Jarvis Landry. Maybe I shouldn't say that, though, because I'm remembering the Miami game, and he did go off in that one from last year. But I gotta believe, I'm not sure if I would imagine he's been in the slot, I guess, still for them, right? I haven't caught a lot of Browns games, so all right. So Brian Poole could have his hands full with that one, and then also David Njoku hasn't turned the corner like some people thought he might in year two. And again, a lot of that has to do with the situation that they were in with Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley there. But, he's someone to watch. And, I liked what, I mentioned Neesman, what he did on Jordan Reed. I liked also Devondre Campbell at times on the Redskins tight ends this past week. So those two guys should be able to hold their own against Njoku. So really it comes down to, is Jarvis Landry going to be a Falcons killer again? And also, Duke Johnson. We have to contain him. I think he's the focal point. And then I guess we should also mention Nick Chubb. Getting to play his hometown team, now the starter. But I haven't been impressed with the Browns O-line. So I think the Falcons could be able to control that matchup, hopefully. And, guys like Deidre Snot, who's had a great rookie season, and then Grady Jarrett's been tearing it up lately since he's returned. So I think they should be able to, once again, which is refreshing, that they can hold these running backs like Barkley and AP, and now hopefully Chubb in check. So really, for me, it comes down to Duke Johnson and Jarvis Landry. Those are the two that they need to focus on from the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think, it'll be interesting to see. I think the Browns do have some pretty talented skill position guys. So if the Falcons revert back to what they were, in weeks 3 and 4 and whatnot, then this Browns offense is going to look a lot better than it has looked in most games to date. in terms of the missed tackles and the blown assignments and all the mental errors and all those sorts of things that plagued this Falcons defense earlier this season, and hasn't really been as much of an issue these last couple of games. But I think the key for the Falcons remains the same as it will remain for all these road games, and certainly as it did against Washington. The Browns aren't necessarily a team that's built to play from behind with their weapons and with Baker Mayfield, and they don't have a particularly efficient offense. I think they're like bottom 5 in third down conversion rate on offense this year. So, if the Falcons can get out to an early lead, then they should be fine. They tend, when they go on the road, when they start fast, they typically win. When they start slow, they typically lose. And, the issue the Falcons, this kind of has some of the symptoms, a little bit of a trap game. And so the Browns are very opportunistic. They lead the league in takeaways. So, like, the issue to me the Falcons are going to have to avoid, and the trap that they're going to have to avoid, is if we get into a game where, Matt Ryan throws 3 picks or something like that, or Tevin Coleman's fumble issues, which haven't been a problem since his rookie year, suddenly reappear, or Ito Smith, who wasn't necessarily known for his ball security, his great ball security at Southern Miss, all of a sudden that becomes an issue this week or something like that, or Justin Hardy muffs a punt, or, just these sort of bonehead mental errors that sort of get the Falcons into problems. And so that's going to be like, this to me is mostly a mental toughness type of game for the Falcons. And if they have it, they shouldn't have too much problems. If, we're still dealing with a team that deals with some complacency and all those sorts of things, then this game may get a little bit hairier than many people expect. So if they come out and do what they're more than capable of doing, and starting fast and getting off to the lead that they need to in order to take the Browns out of this game, then, no worries, and the Falcons should take care of business and roll in this one. But those are really the big questions for me this week. Like, is this team ready? Are they going to be looking past this game? Or are they going to feel a little bit confident coming off of a very impressive win against Washington and be like, oh, yeah, this Browns team isn't nothing. They're the Browns, they're lucky to have 2 wins, all this sort of thing. They got a rookie quarterback, no problem. And they come into this game a little bit complacent and then, get punched in the mouth. And then all of a sudden, like, what's going on? That, to me, is the one concern for me. But we'll have to see if the Falcons can avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. The team talks a lot about competitive toughness, and this is a mental toughness game because, after the big win in Washington, which it was a big win, it was a statement win in my mind, they may be looking ahead towards that New Orleans game and trying to get some revenge and get to 7-4 and get right back into the thick of not only the NFC playoff race, but perhaps even the NFC South race, depending on what New Orleans does with their tough schedule ahead. So, yeah, I mean, this game does have the makings of a trap game, but if they come out early and put away a young team, you never want to give a young team a reason to believe. And if you keep them around long enough, they do have the talent to potentially knock the Falcons off if they're not careful. So, yeah, this has all the makings of a CT game, as Quinn or Dimitroff might like to say, and we'll see if they got them ready to go and if they really are thinking one game at a time, like they constantly say.
Yeah. We got some mailbag questions dealing with this game. Brian basically asked, your homeboy Brian asked, how well do you think the Falcons match up with the Browns? Is this a game that the Falcons should win comfortably? The key word being should.
Yeah, I think we touched on it, but yeah, this should be a win, and I think they do match up pretty well. I mean, I think the Falcons, when they're clicking and everything, they match up well for a lot of teams. I mean, and especially if we're getting performances like we did last week from the offensive and defensive line. I mean, they can put together any type of performance, any type of ball game that's necessary to get wins. So, yeah, this should be a win. But we know what it's like to be Falcons fans. So oftentimes a should-be win turns into a heart palpitating loss or close win or something like that. So hopefully they put them away early and we get another 2-score win, which, I was happy that we got. I've been looking for 2-score wins all season, and maybe we can start putting some together now with Cleveland and then Dallas on deck.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've seen Browns teams beat supposedly better Falcons teams too much in my lifetime. I can remember that '06 game where Michael Vick fumbled the ball.
It's crazy what the all-time series is in Falcons versus Browns history. I mean, I think it's like 3-11 or something like that, or it might be even worse. Like,
yeah.
I would have never thought that, but.
And the Brian Hoyer game 4 years ago, where Brian Hoyer looked like he was a superstar. I guess that game probably got Kyle Shanahan his job in Atlanta. So so I will never be the person that takes the Browns for granted. Even if they were like 0-9 at this point, I'd be like, well, I've seen the Falcons lay some eggs against some bad teams over the years, so I'll never overlook an opponent. But yeah, I think they should roll in this game. It's just, again, whether or not, this is the past Falcon teams. And again, this is the first time Dan Quinn and company have faced the Browns team. Those other games were Jim Mora and Mike Smith and whatnot. And so I do feel reasonably confident that Dan Quinn and company will take care of business this week. But I have been burned by that thought process in the past, so I will never take things for granted.
It's so crazy how a difference a couple weeks make, because I remember being on the show after – I guess it was the Steelers game, and I said that I was 1 foot out the door on the season, and now I couldn't be more in on this. And I mean, that's what that Washington game meant. That was a test, and they passed it with flying colors. And again, it just comes down to consistency. But I think this team now has their mojo. They have more confidence in the guys filling in now with the reps, and that was natural. I mean, we shouldn't have expected rookie guys filling in spots for the first time to just gel right away. And it was all a matter of the coaching staff just finding the right mix, and they're finally doing it. And then, add to it, Deion Jones is coming back in a couple weeks. I mean, yeah, I think we're back on track, and the future's bright. So.
Yeah, I mean, the Washington game was similar to the Dallas game for me last year, because I was, after that Carolina loss, I was just like, yeah, this is a wrap on the season. And then they came out and played, I thought, the best game of the season against that Cowboys team, and did a lot of the things that I did not expect them to do in that game. And so that was a momentum builder. They went like 5-2 after that point last year, I think.
Yeah.
The hope is that they can do basically the same thing after this Redskins win. So we'll have to see. Justin Sandu asks, will the Falcons be able to control the game effectively, running effectively against Cleveland's front seven?
I mean, I know last year Cleveland was one of the best run defenses.
They're one of the worst this year.
They're one of the worst this year.
Yeah.
And I'm not, terrible. I guess, and they have most of the same personnel. I don't know what to make, honestly. I mean, we've talked about the consistency, and is last week's performance something we can expect to see going forward? That's my question with this question. I'm not sure. I mean, I'd like to say yes. I don't put a lot of stock into the matchup necessarily because of last week. I mean, last week they were going up against like the second best run defense, and they just had their way with them. So going up against the worst, again, you want to say yes, but I like some of their personnel that they have there. So for me, it's kind of just a wait and see. We'll see how it goes. If they can manhandle them again and put together 2 straight performances, then, I mean, moving forward, I'll feel like they can probably do this on a consistent basis then. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just a wait and see for me.
Yeah, I mean, they shouldn't have been able to run the ball against Washington, and they did. And they should have no problems running against the Browns. But, knowing the Falcons, that means, Tevin Coleman will have 11 carries for like 24 yards or something like that. So, they should be able to take care of business this week and run the ball very effectively and be that sort of balanced offense. But we'll have to see, because there's been other games this year where they should have been a lot more effective on the ground and they weren't. And so, I can't necessarily, again, take things for granted, but we'll see. Let's get into the mailbag, Matt. And we got first 2 questions come from 2 different people, but they're both on the subject of Vic Beasley. The first one is Nerdy Bird ATL. He asks, honest thoughts on Vic Beasley and Dominique at The Real Patman. asks, I did a GIF review on why Beasley should be used as a Sam so the team can take advantage of his athleticism in coverage and in space, but it had met with some negative. How do you feel about bringing in another pass rusher and allowing Beasley to play Sam? That kind of relates to Bruce Irvin, but I think people who regularly watch this show or follow me on Twitter know how I feel about that second question. So I'm curious, Matt, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I came to terms with it on Twitter, and you happily dropped in and said hello on the one tweet. I'm totally okay with them putting him back at Sam. I just think doing it mid-season is very tough. So that's my only thing with that. Because when he has been dropped in coverage and put in space this year, it hasn't been pretty. But I do think if you're going to use his skill set, that it's become pretty apparent that's probably the best way to do it, so that he can use this athleticism there in coverage and whatnot. And then, you can drop him down in nickel and still let him attack the quarterback at times. So I'm totally cool with it. I just don't think if we, again, there's all this talk about what's Beasley's long-term future with this team. And a lot of people, including myself, are speculating that, I'd much rather use those funds elsewhere, because he is due to make like close to $13 million next year on the 5th-year option. But with that being said, the front office could have other plans. And if they do want to keep him around and extend him to a contract that hopefully is fair, I think his best fit on the field probably is at that Sam spot. And then you roll with Devondre at will, Dion at middle, and Vic at Sam. So I'm cool with that. And then just as far as the other question, as far as my honest analysis of him, he's just a guy has the athletic tools that he came out of college with, but hasn't done much more with them, hasn't really added to his repertoire, hasn't really progressed at all in any way. And he just, it pains me to say this because I'm a huge fan of him. It's one of my favorite guys on the team, but he just doesn't have that killer instinct to finish. I mean, I had a video that I took during the game of the one sack where, Alex Smith eluded him and Grady Jarrett and had that run that was finished off by the big Brian Poole hit. But he had the right tackle beat, and so often you see that from him. He does turn the corner. He has the perfect angle at the quarterback, but he doesn't have that finish instinct that like guys like Tack McKinley have to really just finish that off. Like, you're in the perfect position, just rip through the guy's arm that he's trying to push you away to get you out of the arc. Just finish through, and that's, you just see that way too much from him, and it's unfortunate because, again, I mean, he has the God-given tools that you need to be a successful edge rusher, but he hasn't done a whole lot with them, unfortunately.
Well, I think, to answer that first question, I don't think it's instinct. I think it's just the fact that he doesn't have core strength. I think the issue with Vic is he's a great athlete, but he doesn't have great size. He doesn't have core strength. He doesn't have great length. And so basically he's a speed guy. And unfortunately, he hasn't developed.
I mean, what do you make about his bench reps, though? Is that just...
Look, I don't know. I think that's weight room strength. I don't think that's football strength. Because when you watched him at Clemson, anytime an offensive tackle got his hands on him, he got stonewalled every single time. So, and you saw absolutely no bull rush from him. And, it's just like he's probably got great upper body strength, but,
you do see bull rushes every now and then with him. But
it doesn't, it knocks the offensive tackle back initially, and then the offensive tackle is able to anchor, and he can't finish the play. Like, he'll collapse the pocket a little bit, but he's not putting that guy on skates and driving him back into the quarterback or pulling him over like we see with Tack McKinley or John Abraham, or insert any other top pass rusher that you can think of that has an effective bull rush. So, I mean, look, I think Vic is fine. I think he's always been fine. I'm like Dominique. I've always been much bigger fan of his potential as a linebacker. I think you're right in terms of switching him to that role in the middle of this season probably is not going to give you and garner the best results. But I do think this offseason, if the Falcons do intend to keep him on the roster and not cut him or trade him, before the league year starts and on March 13th. If they do intend to keep him around, then to me, trying to make him into this hand in the dirt defensive end, we've now seen him play that role as a rookie, and they moved him to linebacker, and then he sort of spent 2 years barely playing linebacker until the injuries hit last year. And while he was up and down, that goes to show from a guy that has very little experience playing that, I think. But I think you saw the flashes of his potential there. He's got to work on his coverage. He's got to work on understanding how to drop into space. But again, with more reps and an entire offseason to do that, I think he can figure those things out. He's got the athleticism to be an excellent man corner or man cover guy against tight ends. We've seen him be able to cover guys like Gronk and Austin Seferian-Jenkins in the few instances where he's been asked to play man coverage against those guys. But those are few and rare instances. So, and he does a good job setting the edge, a much better job setting the edge at that same linebacker spot than Devondre Campbell does. I think Campbell is a more natural will linebacker for a lot of, I could spend another 20 minutes talking about Campbell and his fit. But I think, ideally you have Vic, Deion Jones, and Campbell as your three linebackers, and then mix in Foye Olakun, however you want to mix him in nickel or whatever you want to do, and you're good to go. And then, of course, Vic can always get opportunities rushing the quarterback in nickel. But I don't think he should be sort of your main go-to. Like, ideally, the ideal role for him is kind of that Dwight Freeney role, in my opinion, in terms of being a pass rusher, where he gets 25 to 30 reps rushing the quarterback, but not the bulk of them coming off the edge. And you get somebody else at that spot to play opposite Takk McKinley that can be a little bit more of, whatever you want to call it, that dog that can reliably get after the quarterback on a consistent basis. But I think Vic is a fine asset. I just don't think the Falcons have fully utilized him and developed his potential in certain areas. They've tried in other areas, and it quite hasn't reached the fruition. So I think there's still something salvageable. The comparison I've made is, to me, he's like a Connor Barwin, Anthony Barr type of player. I feel like if you develop the linebacker skills, he has the potential to be an Anthony Barr type. Right now, he's kind of a Connor Barwin type. Connor Barwin was a okay 4-3 defensive end, but he was at his best playing as a 3-4 outside linebacker at the various points in his career. So that to me is kind of what Vic Beasley is, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having Connor Barwin in your team. You just probably don't want to pay that guy, $13 million.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you look at just the career arc and the roles that they've put him in, I mean, you draft him in 2015 because there was virtually no pass rush on the team. So you kind of drafted him with the mindset that you needed to have him play defensive end, or you needed him to rush the passer, when he's on the field. And then, he has his 2016, outlier season, whatever you want to call it. And then we go to 2017 where, they kind of have some guys, you bring in Takk, you have Adrian Claiborne, you have Grady and Poe rushing from the interior. So you have some pass rushers. They had some injuries to linebackers, so they shifted him to linebacker because that's the role that they needed him to fill. And then you come to 2018 again, Poe's gone, Claiborne's gone. So they had to put him back to DN to use him as a pass rusher. Basically what I'm saying is it seems like they've been using him how they've needed to use him rather than where he's most effective at. And I'm just curious now at this point, flip-flopping him all this time. He's now going to be entering year 5 next year. Is there any precedence of a guy that can then go at linebacker this late into his career and develop those skills to the point where it's worth having him on a second contract for?
Probably not.
So
I think that's the situation for the Falcons. I think the Falcons, we'll have to see what the rest of the season. For all we know, Vic Beasley goes off over these next 8 weeks, and all of a sudden we're having a very different conversation 8 weeks from now than we're having right now. But assuming that the status quo remains and we see flashes of Vic Beasley and we see him get a couple of hurries here, but nothing sort of point where you're like, oh my God, Vic Beasley's killing it out there. Check out that Arizona game. He should have an opportunity to dominate that game. But I think the issue the Falcons are going to have to answer between now and March is do they want to try and salvage whatever is left in the tank with Vic Beasley, or do they just want to punt now and move on and try to get value for him now that they're not going to probably get 2 years from now when he leaves or when he's not re-signed or whatever? And that's ultimately the question. What their answer is, my guess is, generally based off of the Falcons' trends over the years, is they're going to see if they can salvage him. I think they're going to convince themselves that 16 sack, 15 and a half sack guy is still somewhere in there, and they're going to find a way to try to get it out of him, and he'll be on the roster next year. And we'll have to see whether or not their faith in that works out. But obviously I'm not necessarily optimistic about it.
I mean, it was also super interesting that Ian Rappaport tweeted out, on Sunday morning that other teams did inquire about Vic Beasley at the deadline. Obviously, the Falcons passed on that, and I think a lot of that had to do with, the situation that they find themselves in. They weren't giving up on the season, and they're obviously right to do that after that big statement win in Washington. But I think, once this chapter, this 2018 season's over with, and they do roll into the offseason again, and they have a plan where they can bolster the pass rush in other areas, it will be interesting to me if, it seems like they have some leverage now where they can move on from him and not feel like, they're leaving themselves bare as far as their roster goes. Because again, removing close to $13 million off the books can easily help them, especially in a free agent class that's so ripe with talent. Some big names out there that they can just swap him out for, and then obviously this draft class coming up is huge. So I hope they entertain it at least somewhat, depending on what the offer is. Because again, just like you said, it's very unlikely that they can salvage something from a linebacker standpoint this late in his career, and from a pass rusher, if they haven't seen in 4 years what he is at this point, then that's just a big black eye on their mark as an evaluator, I guess, which can't say that often for Dan Quinn. I mean, that's one of his strong suits, but yeah, I just don't know what they're thinking at this point.
We'll have to see. We got 2 Deion Jones related questions. Jelani234 asks, when Deion Jones comes back, who is the weak side backer starter in the base? And Brian asks, do you think our defense will be scary good when Deion Jones gets back? So and Lee, fan since 1988, when do you expect Deion back? Do you think he goes on some kind of snap count initially? What do you think about Deion and Foye and nickel and bringing Campbell to take Vic's spot on the line?
So I think to answer who will be the base, I think that'll be Foye. That's kind of where he's been these last several weeks, and we've seen his snap counts increase there. So I think it'll be Foye at will, Deion at the mic, and I think they'll keep, Campbell at Sam, but then in the nickel, it'll be Campbell and Deion back to the way it's been. I'm interested to see where Duke will fit into that. I mean, he has been improving in limited snaps, and maybe they rotate a little bit with Foye and Duke, but I think they should give the job to Foye. As far as will the defense be scary good, I don't think. I mean, the defense being scary good is all tied to the D-line play, and I think you'll agree with that statement. If they can get after the quarterback and stuff, that'll, I think obviously the coverage on the back end should give more time for the defensive line to maybe make an impact. So that's where you'll see the biggest improvement. But as far as being scary good, no, I think they'll be obviously better and more towards the middle of the pack, hopefully. But I mean, this defense has been pretty bad. So I think obviously Deion's one player and one very talented player, but he's not going to have the impact to just make this defense not be top 5 or anything like that. And then the last question, when do I expect Deion back? I've been saying the Thanksgiving game, and I think mainly just because, he's eligible to return for that Dallas game, but with a short week, ahead and such a meaningful game ahead, I hope that they'd be somewhat cautious and say, rather than rush him back and then he has to then quick turnaround and play another game within a matter of 4-5 days. I'd say they hold him out for that Dallas game. I think they could win that game without him and have him be healthy for, his favorite team that he loves to go up against, and his favorite opponent, Drew Brees, who he loves to have timely interceptions against. I think that's kind of where the target date should be and hopefully is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point with the short week coming off the heels of that. You might want to save him. So, but it does seem like he's on target to play in that Dallas game based off of his practice reports. So, look, I'll take as much Deion Jones as I can get. So, if I can get him for both the Dallas and the Saints game, I'll take it. But obviously, the coaches and the doctors have to make those decisions. So, we'll see about when he comes back. But yeah, I think that Thanksgiving Day game against the Saints makes a lot of sense. Yeah, to follow the heels, I think Olakun playing at weak side linebacker. My expectation with Duke Riley is he'll basically be, special teams guy, which I'm so overjoyed with because he's such a great special teams player.
He hasn't played a lot of special team snaps from what I've seen. I don't know.
Well, it's because he's been a starter, and basically the Falcons don't put starters on special teams.
But he's been a starter by name, but the snap counts on defense don't even indicate that he's really playing, major minutes, major snaps there. So that's why, Foy's had snapped him the last several weeks, and it hasn't caused an uptick in his special team snaps. So I don't know. That's what I would think too. But
well, I think once Deion Jones comes back, you'll probably see that change.
Because Foy's been playing the major snaps and has the special team snaps. So you think when Deion comes back, Foy will get his snaps that he's gotten on defense, but then Duke's going to get his special team snaps?
Well,
why wouldn't that just be the thing now?
Well, look, I think once Deion Jones comes back, there's really no reason to play Duke Riley anymore. So if he's going to play, then he's got to play special teams because he's not going to play on defense.
I mean, is he a guy that could potentially be inactive? Because then that's also a thing. I mean, if they keep 6 linebackers, unless they part ways with Bruce Carter, which I think keeping a veteran like there in a pinch is important, especially if Deion goes down again. I wouldn't be surprised at that. I mean, I was just surprised that he hasn't gotten really any special team snaps with his defensive snaps going down.
Yeah, let me try to look it up. I feel like I've seen him a couple of times on.
I mean, he's gotten a few, but I'm pretty sure this past game, Foy's gotten.
I know he's not working. He hasn't been working that much on kickoff coverage. I know he's primarily a punt guy in kickoff return team, but I'd have to go and check my notes. But we'll see. I don't know. Basically the point I'm making, he's not good on special teams. So if he does play special teams,
well, maybe that's why then.
Then I'm not looking forward to that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
What's next? Justin Sandu asks, how did Sherrod Niesman look at safety?
I mean, I've been impressed with Niesman. I think he just needs to be named the starting strong safety. I don't think the play of him versus Richards has been particularly close. And hopefully, I mean, with these last 2 weeks, Niesman's dominated the snaps. Hopefully that's the sign that, come this week against Cleveland, Niesman, if he's not playing all the snaps, he's playing again. I mean, most of them. This whole flip-flopping thing, I think, they found the mix at linebacker, but as far as the secondary goes, I think they need to try to lock those 4 in. I just think the communication there is most important on the back end. So I hope, this is finally the time where they roll with Niesman. Because again, I've been pretty impressed with him.
I think Niesman has looked pretty good. I haven't watched the film yet of the Redskins game, so I will reserve judgment a little bit on heaping too much praise on his game without seeing that, because there's a lot of stuff that you really can't tell what the safeties are doing on the television copy.
Don't get me wrong. He's no Keanu Neal, but I think from an instinct standpoint, he just sees it better. So that.
Oh no. I think he's fine. Like I wasn't trying to be critical of you or anything. I was just. Yeah. There was a couple of issues that I saw on TV, and I want to see them on film before I go out.
There's definitely the one where Manuel, I guess, was ripping him, and I'm not sure. I kind of missed that when I was watching it, and I didn't get a chance to go back and look either. But I am, kind of interested on what that was about. But
yeah, look, the point is, I don't think there's any doubt that Neesman's better. I happen to be that crazy person that doesn't think Jordan Richards is the worst person on the planet, like most Falcon fans do. I think he's, like, I'm not going to say he's good, but I think he's done a few more positives than people give him credit for. So, yeah, I think Neesman's been solid. I think he should have the job, but, the fact that, he's getting 50 snaps and Richards is getting 15 or whatever it is, isn't crazy to me. It's just like, okay, that's fine. But we'll see.
And I was, I guess, mistaken a little bit. Duke played 10 special team snaps, and Foy played 11.
Yeah, I know Foy's on kickoff coverage. I know that off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And on punt team. And I feel like I'm pretty sure maybe he was in the Redskins game. I haven't charted it yet, but I know Duke has not been on kickoff coverage. Carter has been on kickoff coverage pretty consistently, and I feel like Duke is on punt team occasionally, but I'd have to check my notes again.
Yeah.
Speaking of special teams, Justin Sandu asks, why is Hardy still returning punts? Why not let Marvin Hall do it?
Yeah, no, we've talked about this a few times on the show, and all I can say is just the reliability standpoint from catching it. Although even that was a concern, and I think a lot of it had to do with like the sun and the shade. But that first or second punt return that Justin Hardy was supposed to have in the game, he totally didn't even see the ball, I guess, and was, unless they were, I don't know what the announcers talked about running some crazy fake, but I think that was just
I've seen teams do that, but I don't think that's what.
Yeah, that's not what was going on at all. And I did look up the punt return stats before coming on the show, and as far as punt returners that qualify with at least 10 returns, fans aren't going to be happy to hear Justin Hardy's last in the league with a 4.7 average. Although, and again, they have him down for, well, this might have been before week 9, but they had him down for 10 returns and 9 fair catches. No, that can't be right. But yeah, you want to take a guess who number 1 in the league is for punt return yard average?
Is it Andre Roberts?
It's Andre Roberts, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. Again, I said on a previous show that I just don't feel like they valued explosiveness or they valued the position as much, and you disagreed and talked about some of their drafting and stuff. But I just think at this point, they're not looking for a whole lot out of there as far as just they're not looking for mistakes. And I think Justin Hardy's a guy you can count on to not make a whole lot of mistakes, but people probably disagree with some of the decisions he's made as far as fair catches and letting balls go over his head. So, I'm for trying something new and for giving Marvin Hall a shot, and running out of answers why they don't try it. But again, I think they're just looking for reliability and someone who's got sure hands or getting, I think you mentioned getting Hardy, a role on this team, and since he doesn't really seem to have one on the offense. So yeah, I don't know. It's a head scratcher a little bit, but I'm not too as concerned, because again, I think the field position issues that the Falcons continue to have, it's more because of the defense and not anything that the punt return team or Justin Hardy in particular can save. So,
I mean, it would help if you had a guy averaging 10 yards a return. But look, as someone who has watched the Falcons special teams for many years, there's always one or two decisions that Keith Armstrong makes that I'm always baffled by. And it sort of is part of the equation in terms of my evaluation of special teams and Keith Armstrong. So there's always like, okay, there's going to be two things that he does that I have no idea why he's doing it and it doesn't make any sense to me. But like, as long as that number doesn't creep up to like 3 or 4 or whatever, then we're good to go. And so this is what the one that qualifies for it. As I said before, my conspiracy theory is that because Justin Hardy is no longer an active member of their coverage units on special teams, and because he's basically been marginalized on offense due to the presence of Calvin Ridley, and basically the Falcons really have no use for him other than getting him some opportunities on punt return. And this is basically like, I guess they're like, hey, Justin, keep your head up and stay focused and be ready to go each Sunday because this is your role, because there's nothing else for you to do on this offense or in special teams for us, because we have Gage and we have Bethel as the gunners now. And Marvin Hall's also shown he's a capable gunner as well. And, on offense, you have Hall and Julio at that X wide receiver spot. You have Ridley and Sanu at the Z wide receiver spot. You got Sanu primarily as a slot guy, but then Julio and Ridley get a healthy amount. And so basically Justin Hardy's basically twiddling his thumbs and gets an opportunity to play when someone needs a breather, like Sanu needs a breather or whatever, or Ridley needs a breather, and that's about it. And so to me, that's the only reason that I can logically think of why they continue to run him out there on punts, because otherwise he just basically do nothing on Sundays other than play 10 to 15 snaps when someone needs a rest and get maybe one target and be the up back on kickoff returns. And basically, when every kickoff is basically a touchback, he's not doing anything either. Just telling Marvin Hall, don't take it out of the end zone. That's basically his job. So that's the only logical explanation I can come up with. Next up is Falcons. Andy, do you think the good performances in the trenches will continue, or were they a fluke?
Yeah, kind of a similar answer to the question about, can the Falcons offensive line, run the football and dominate the trenches against the Browns. I kind of taking a wait and see approach, hoping they turn the corner. But it's tough to say without, seeing a couple games strung together. So, Andy, I'm hoping so. I think the offense, if there's anything, I think the offensive line, I'm a little bit more confident in than, the defensive line controlling the trenches. But again, I want to take a wait and see approach before kind of making a claim one way or the other.
I'm the opposite. I have a lot more confidence now in the defensive line than I do in the offensive line.
Wow. That's shocking.
I've seen 2 good games of the offensive line, and
I think
6 terrible games.
I don't know. I think I mean that's a valid point, but I'm more, I think, basing it off of the talent that's on that offensive line compared to, for me, yes, Jack Crawford's having a career year. I'm still not totally sold on him. I mean, he really, for me, it's 2 guys, and Tack McKinley, I think even too, has kind of been, he's had moments, but for me, Grady Jarrett's the guy there, and it's a bunch of kind of patchwork guys, more or less. Well, Dejan Sanat's great, but again, still a rookie, still learning the NFL waters. So I don't think you can totally just bank on him every week, although it's getting to that point soon. But for me, I mean, Alex Mack, I think Jake Matthews is really evolving into a franchise cornerstone left tackle that we all hope for. Ryan Schrader had a great bounce back game, I thought, for the most part, from what I remember this past Sunday. And then the guards, those guys, man, those were my takeaway. I mean, if there's any guys that I'd give a game ball to, Ben Garland and Wes Schweitzer were the guys this past Sunday. And those are guys that they've had in that role before, that they know what they're going to get from them. And I think, Schweitzer's still a guy that's kind of growing as a player. So for me, I'm just more confident in the individual guys on the offensive line as opposed to the defensive line. Still, again, I think a lot of Washington going up against that matchup was, I mean, they were just hit by the injury bug. I mean, losing their best guy coming into the game, Trent Williams, and then Brandon Scherf's their second best guy, all pro guard. I think that had a lot to do. I mean, they really beat up on a unit that just wasn't ready to play because of those injuries. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they've only had 2 performances, and that's why I'm taking a wait and see approach. But I just feel like that game against Washington, against that unit, was big time.
It's fair. I just think the defensive line has been trending upwards a little bit longer than the offensive line. The offensive line was trending downwards, in my opinion, for up until last week. And so I need to see another good game from them before I start to sort of flip on it. So we'll see. Andy's next question is, do you think Tavecchio gets cut when Bryant returns, or will the Falcons consider keeping him on the roster just in case?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to it earlier. For me, and this is probably a pessimistic approach, but just the way the season's gone, and you can never trust. I've learned that you can't trust the injury reports that Dan Quinn's spitting out on a weekly basis. So for me, I think there's an outside shot that they IR Matt Bryant. Now, if they do that, obviously the question becomes simple. I mean, they keep Tavecchio. If he does come back, and again, I mean, he's been trending that way according to them, but until we see it, I'm not going to totally believe that. Because again, 43-year-old dealing with a hamstring as a kicker, I mean, that's the worst injury that they can possibly deal with. So in the event that he does come back, I can't really see them keeping 2 kickers. I mean, when was the last time any team's ever really done that? Maybe in like the 50s or something. I don't know. But at that point, you're probably dropping him and you're bringing back Deion Jones. But yeah, we'll see, I guess, like a lot of things.
I have to look it up because Giorgio might be eligible for the practice squad. Yeah,
but with the way, how long do you think he lasts there, though? Because with the way, I mean, Chargers, they elevated their guy from the practice squad, but I think they'd probably rather have a guy with some surefire tape like Tavecchio has, and they'd probably drop that guy in a second if he was available. So that's why I think, I mean, they would try to do that. Obviously, that's the smart play, but I don't. If he's gone, I think someone's nabbing him probably, and then that's the last of Italian Ice.
Okay. Look, Giorgio's great. He played for the Raiders. He played for the Falcons. That's 2 checks in my book. But if he leaves, I don't care. Like, whatever. I have no attachment to him.
Right. I mean, I'm looking at it from a different perspective as far as, and I don't know if we'll talk about this much more, but as far as ways that they potentially trim the fat, you talked about cuttings. We've gotten the discussions already about some of the bigger names that they'd cut. I don't particularly think they're going to do that. You mentioned them running this team back in 2019, and I think that's what they're going to do. So if they want to create some space to potentially make a couple smaller mid-sized moves, or I mentioned swapping Vic out for a bigger name pass rusher to help cover some of that cost. Ways you can do that is, look, we all love Matt Bryant. He's a legend. No one's ever going to forget him, but he's due to make over $4 million next year. And if his body is showing to break down, you don't get that money back if you have to put a guy like that on IR. So if you found a potential replacement who's at an age where there's long-term upside there, that's why I'd kind of a little bit, have some regret if that guy gets sent elsewhere and, he's kicking 50-yard game-winning field goals for another team. And then we're looking to try to find a replacement, and we're in a situation like LA Chargers are, where kickers missing extra points and missing, easy field goals. Kickers matter. Kickers matter, whether we like to admit it or not. As because of the game we talk about here, football. I mean, they don't serve a purpose other than just kicking a ball. But I'm always thinking long term with this team, and if they got a guy like Giorgio and who can potentially fill in, and he looked like he has, it'd be a little disappointing if he got away. So that's kind of where I'm at if it would happen, but let's see.
Okay. Look, I think all that's fair, but my perspective is simple. It's Matt Ryan can keep kicking for the Falcons as long as he wants to keep kicking. So if he decides he wants to hang it up after the season, then you start making the decision to look ahead. But if he wants to come back, then he's more than worth $4 million to me. And I think he's more than worth $4 million to this offense. So, the thing about Giorgio is he wasn't that good in Oakland. And then he's come to Atlanta and he's like this,
I mean, that's how a lot of kickers are, though, too. Like they're
but I don't think, I know kicking has been a major issue for a lot of teams around the league, but I don't think it doesn't change my perspective that I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, you can just go outside and pluck a good kicker off the tree or whatever. But it is one of those things where the Falcons play, 9 indoor games a year. And so kickers generally do better. And so I think that's a big reason why Giorgio suddenly goes from being like the 27th best, most accurate field goal kicker last year to, being perfect this year in Atlanta. So I don't feel like the Falcons need to feel like, oh no, if we don't keep Giorgio, we'll never be able to find a kicker as good as he is. So I think, if Matt Bryant wants to keep playing, you keep him. If Matt Bryant comes back this season, you cut Giorgio, you put him on the practice squad. If some team signs him and Giorgio leaves, I mean, again, the whole point of the practice squad is Giorgio has the choice then to go to another team or stay in Atlanta. And if he chooses to go, okay, great, Giorgio, take your opportunity and be free. If he decides to stay in Atlanta, awesome. But I'm not going to be worried about who's kicking after Matt Bryant until Matt Bryant is no longer playing football for the Falcons. So that's my stance on it. So if Giorgio has to take the boot so Matt Bryant can come back, okay, I have no attachment to Giorgio at all. I don't. My personal opinion is I don't get why people are so attached to Giorgio. It doesn't make any sense to me. Matt Bryant's been kicking for a decade in Atlanta, and some guy makes 2 50-yard field goals on a Monday night game, and all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, he should replace Matt Bryant." That's weird to me.
That was a great debut, though, and I think a lot of it too. I mean, I'm enjoying the Italian Ice name. I'm a huge nickname guy. Huge, anything to market a player like that. I love that. I'll eat that stuff up. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But again, I mean, do you see a scenario where I just don't want them to be in a position, because he can easily just say this offseason, hey, I don't want to play, and then they don't really have a contingency plan in play anymore. And that's why I think, again, I don't see them carrying 2 kickers, but it's a very real possibility when you got a 43-year-old kicker dealing with an injury now at this point of his career. I mean, it's very possible where he's like, all right, I realize my body can't do this anymore, and you guys got to think about moving on from me. So I don't know. That's where I'm.
Well, I mean, look, again, I think you cross that bridge when you get to it. Like, I don't feel like you need a contingency plan right now. Like, I think if Matt Bryant retires after this season, then you go out and you have 9 months to find a new kicker. It's not that big a deal. You can.
But you might have found one though. And we're talking Matt Bryant up so much because we're realizing how important he's been to the success of this football team, hitting these game winners. Hell, even the LA game, if it wasn't for him, they probably don't win that playoff game. So having a good kicker is important. And maybe I'm rushing the judgment that Giorgio's a good kicker, but they are going to play. They are going to play half their games in the Mercedes-Benz in the dome, and if he can hit 56-yarders in there, like he did, I mean that's all I need to see. So I don't know.
Look, I think this is sort of like a look. Yes, you're right. Matt Bryant's great. He's been great. To me, this is kind of like a John Abraham situation where like Vic Beasley comes along and all of a sudden he gets put on this pedestal. Oh, he's John Abraham again. He's not. Like, whoever replaces Matt Bryant is not going to be Matt Bryant. Like, Matt Bryant is arguably, in Football Outsiders did a study of this like 3 or 4 years ago, he's arguably the greatest clutch kicker in NFL history. So the expectation that you're going to find a guy as good as Matt Bryant, like, I just think you kind of have to just forget that.
No.
Like, that's – so I just think, they'll have an opportunity to get another kicker. Again, if it's Giorgio, great. Like, I'm not necessarily of the mindset that if you cut Giorgio, you're never going to have another opportunity in the next 9 months to sign him. Like, you could easily re-sign him because every other team could basically be like, oh yeah, our kicker situation is fine. It's not like, for me, it's just not something I worry too much about. Like, it's a non-issue for me, but I get why other people are concerned about it. But for me, it's just like, whatever, man. Matt Bryant kick, and if he stops kicking, then you roll with whatever you got at that point.
Aaron, this is basically what it's like when you go on and on about a fullback, just to let you know. So just keep that in the back of your mind when people want to talk kickers or whatever, or the importance of them. Just, that's.
Look, I'm not saying the kickers aren't important. I'm not ready to bury Matt Bryant at all and move on to this new guy.
No, I'm not either. But you know how Father Time works. I mean, he signed a 3-year deal, but you get a hamstring injury like that at 43. I mean, I hope he bounces back, and I hope he does live out that contract. Because again, I want to see him kick a game-winning Super Bowl or game-winning kick in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's the perfect fairy tale ending for Matt Bryant and for Falcons fans. But we'll see.
Okay, well, he's got what? I feel like a hamstring, even for a 43-year-old guy, it's not going to take 8 weeks to heal. So I'm not too worried about it. But we'll see what happens. Again, for me, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm not going to lose any sleep worrying about replacing Matt Bryant until we have to worry about replacing Matt Bryant. Next question is for you, Matt. Why is from Scott Karasik? You guys may know him.
Yeah.
Why is Matt so worried about the cap when it's so easy to get around?
So, I mean, I touched on it a little bit with that last question as far as, the ways the Falcons are going to go about free agency, or how I think they will. I mean, I think they're going to try to run this team back, and they're not going to be huge players in free agency once again, much to the chagrin of a lot of fans. Right now I have it projected at like 28, 29 million in cap space, assuming $109 million cap. And that's before Grady Jarrett's extension, which now it looks like might be put off till the off season. We'll see. They don't have a lot of wiggle room anymore. They're down to like 2.6 million on the cap last I checked. So if they are going to do a Grady deal and you're going to accelerate some of that signing bonus, that's going to wipe away most of that. But I just think with the salary cap, they're not going to cut a lot of players. And if you are going to restructure some bonuses, I mean, you got to make sure that those guys are going to be on the roster to carry out their deal. I mean, you're just pushing, current problems into the future. So guys like Robert Alford or Mohamed Sanu or Ryan Schrader, if you're going to restructure their deals, you got to make sure that you're comfortable with them in their current roles for, the years 2020 or 2021. So, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the case. I think guys like Sanu, I've said next year will likely be his last year. Robert Alford might be in a similar boat. So, you can move money around, but you got to make sure that the money that you're moving around, that's going to be put on a future year's cap. So those guys you're basically ensuring their roster spots. And I'm not sure that they necessarily want to do that too much more because they want to give themselves more flexibility. So that's kind of where my head's been, with the cap and what they're going to do. My one wish, and I've talked about it already, is possibly getting in on one of these pass rushers, a guy like Brandon Graham or Olivier Vernon. Not going to totally break the bank. They're going to be, I think, 1 to 2 year deals. I think with Graham anyways, I mean, he's going to be 31 or so, still a productive player, but I'm not sure he's going to get a huge, third contract. So he's a guy that they can swap out Vic Beasley's contract and throw that 13 million Brandon Graham's way. to bolster the pass rush. So that's kind of what I've been seeing as they're playing, and I just don't see them restructuring a lot of deals or moving money around because, again, I'm not sure that they're wanting to commit past next year to guys like Sanu and Alford and Schrader. So.
Yeah. Look, I think the Falcons, and this has been the case the last couple of years, they have the flexibility that they want to create cap space in order to spend some money this offseason. They have the flexibility of doing that. They can cut several guys and free up a bunch of money if they want to do that. Obviously, then they will have to replace some of those guys. I think several of those players, they sort of already have some potential replacements already in the roster, so it would make some moves potentially easier. But, to Scott's point, like, the salary cap isn't necessarily a hindrance unless you make it a hindrance. And so the question for the Falcons is going to be whether or not they do what I suggested and what you mentioned earlier, which is basically run back the same team, which I think they probably will. And therefore, they'll probably do what they do as Falcons and be like, oh, we just got to cut. We're a couple of pieces away. We got to tweak this and tweak that. And we got to upgrade this D-line spot and upgrade this D-line spot and add a veteran here and add a veteran there. And, re-sign this guy and whatnot. And they'll basically have the bulk of the same roster as they've had the last couple of years. And, hope that with the draft will lead to a much more successful mix come the regular season and potentially postseason. And we'll have to see how that goes. But I think, Scott's point of like the salary cap isn't that big a deal, I think is right. But at the same time, I think the way the Falcons typically play it is that, basically if they go into training, if they go in the offseason with like 25 to 30 million in salary cap space, they'll be active in free agency. If they go into the offseason with less than 20, 15 to 20 or whatever it is, then they'll basically, sit on their thumbs and do nothing. So it's that sweet spot in terms of, could they easily, turn 15 into 30? Absolutely. Will they do that? That's the big question. And a lot of that will depend on how certain players finish this season. Guys like Alford, guys like Schrader, guys like Sanu. I think Brooks Reed, potentially Garner. Depends on what Fusco does and what Garland does and what Schweitzer does the rest of the season. Again, Matt Bryant's situation is another situation. So they'll have some options to sort of move money around and make some moves to free up some cap space. Maybe they'll look at Alex Mack's contract and redo that. Maybe they'll look at Trufant's contract and redo that. Obviously they're going to have to address Julio's contract next offseason. They might approach Devontae and ask him to move some of his money around or whatever. So they'll have the flexibility if they want to in order to create cap space, but it's just a question of, do they have the motivation to do so? Lee at fan since 1988 seems really risky just to having two running backs active on game day. Do you want to see Hill play some this year to see if the Falcons need to spend a mid-round pick on a running back if Tico walks? Also, any concern that Devontae and Ito are similar in play?
I mean, Lee, I'm with you. I've never really liked the way that the Falcons do this on game days with only two running backs, but I think a lot of it goes back to an earlier point I made with just the way the roster is constructed with guys like, Bethel and Gage. They're locked in on game days because of their special teams roles. So that kind of eliminates the opportunity to have sort of a luxury and have Brian Hill be active because he doesn't really provide a lot on special teams. But he's definitely a guy I want to see something of. And I think the coaching staff, hopefully in practice, he's shown enough maybe to them where they can get a sense of what they can expect from him. I know, he's won the teammate of the week, it seems like, quite a bit this season. And that probably has a lot to do with him working as a scout team guy. Probably definitely was useful serving the AP role, being, that he's a bigger back. And I'm sure that helped with their game plans this past week. But he's definitely someone I want to see in game action so that they can, so that we can get at least a sense of what to make going forward. I do think, running back is a potential spot where they can, again, on like day 3 coming up in 2019's draft, take a speed guy, in the event that they let Tevin walk, and like he's asking about, is Devontae and Ito, are you worried about them being too similar? I mean, I do agree that they're a similar type of back, but I don't think that's a worry. I mean, if you can get another Devontae Freeman on your roster, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I think very highly of Devontae. I think he's one of the best backs when healthy in the league. So I'm not too concerned about that. And I think, like I was getting to, you can always find the speed element in drafts to offset that and to have that change of pace. So it's possible that that's the route that they may go in the upcoming draft if they let Tevin walk. Because again, I'm not sure that Brian Hill necessarily, in the limited that we've seen of him, that he necessarily provides that. But again, we haven't had too much of a sample size. But yeah, we'll see. I think it's going to take another injury probably, because we're probably locked into having just 2 backs active for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't spend too much time worrying about only having 2 running backs active. If in some nightmare scenario where both guys get hurt in the course of the game, I think the Falcons have the personnel to compensate. I think they obviously can do some 12 gauge stuff with Sanu. They can run some jet sweeps and whatnot with their wide receivers. They're comfortable going empty. They've played Paulson in the backfield. They can play Ortiz in the backfield just to give Matt Ryan an opportunity to have somebody in the backfield that can sort of handle the blitz pickups. There's nothing wrong with them basically throwing the ball 55 times in a game if they had to, in a situation where they lost all their running backs with this quarterback and whatnot. So I think, it is a risk. It's a calculated risk, but I don't think it's anything that, oh no, both Tevin and Ito are down. The Falcons can't run the football. Like, they could just throw the ball short, and, a 6-yard pass is just as good as a 6-yard run. And the Falcons have played that way. We saw that against Carolina at the end of last season, where they basically abandoned the running game and just reverted to a dink and dunk passing offense to sort of basically fill in the role for their running game. So it's not something I particularly am too concerned about. As for drafting a running back next year, I think I'm not going to say it's a waste of a pick, because it depends on, are there talented running backs that sort of are there available in day 3 that can help your team out? Sure. Like, I'm not going to ever say no to a good player. But I think in terms of this team's needs, I think between Devontae, Ito, and Brian Hill, I think you're good to go. If Tevin Coleman leaves, if he stays, obviously, you're even better. But I don't feel like you need to feel compelled that you need to have a good third running back on this roster, given, basically, I think Brian Hill's better. I probably have a higher opinion of Brian Hill than probably most people do. But at the same time, that third running back is basically there to play special teams. And so unless you're drafting a guy that's going to replace Justin Hardy as your punt returner, then there's really not a compelling need there if you have Devontae and Ito at that 1 and 2 spot. Andy's question is, what do you think the Falcons' record looks like at the end of the season?
I say 10-6, and it gets them the 6th seed.
I've been thinking 9-7 for a while. Let's be honest. A couple of weeks ago, I thought the best case scenario was 9-7.
Oh yeah, you and me both. You and me both.
Yeah. So, I feel much more confident today that they can get to 10-6 than I did 2 weeks ago. So yeah, let's go with 10-6. I feel like 9 or 10 wins should be the case. Just, a hiccup here or there, you go from 10-6 to 9-7. So let's go with 10-6.
I think the big game in the schedule, and I think it's basically for the 6th seed, is that Green Bay game in Lambeau Field. Because I think if I was looking at the schedules of a lot of the teams that are going to be vying for the 3, 4, and 6 seed, and I'm probably going to base most of my next article about it. But if the Packers beat the Falcons in that game, their schedule kind of sets up for them to finish the next 3 games. I believe they play the Jets, Jets, Bears, and Detroit at home. The Bears game, I guess, I think you're higher on the Bears than I am, but I think they can win that Bears game and win the next 4, and then at that point, they would have the 6th seed. So for me, the monumental game, the marquee game, is that game in Lambeau Field, and a lot of fans will probably point to the Falcons having Green Bay's number lately, but all those games came at home. I think Matt's only won one in Lambeau, and that was his rookie year, if I'm not mistaken. And it's going to be a December game. It's going to be cold. So that game, I think, for me, is the big one. If they can win that one, then I think 10-6 is attainable, and the 6th seed is attainable as well.
Yeah. Like if I was predicting the rest of the schedule, I would say that for the Falcons, they should win their next 3 home games against Dallas, Baltimore, and Arizona. They should win this week against Cleveland on the road. They'll probably lose that Thursday night game to New Orleans. Sorry. I think they'll probably at this point lose that Week 16 game on the road against Carolina, and they'll probably win that final road game against Tampa Bay in Week 17. So I think that Green Bay game in Lambeau is sort of the deciding factor for me at this point between 10-6 and 9-7. So if they can go on the road and beat Green Bay in Lambeau, in likely what's going to be a very cold game, they'll finish 10-6. If they don't, then they'll probably finish 9-7. But of course, there's probably going to be a hiccup game in there, or a game that I predicted them to lose that they probably wind up winning. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep.
Last question comes from Jelani234. Going into the 2019 draft, what should the first 4 rounds of the Falcons look like in terms of positions?
So I love this question. I love always talking about the draft. For me, the first 2 rounds, well, I want to see them take – honestly, I want to see them take all 4 trench guys in the first 4 rounds. For me, though, I'd rather them double dip on defensive line first. Again, with the zone blocking scheme, and I know we've gotten in discussions before about whether it's an antiquated thought that you can take, mid-round offensive linemen and make them effective starters in the NFL. We're going to disagree on that, I think. But I think they can find guys, again, and I'm not so sure that for me, the offensive line, obviously they've had their down moments, but if you take out the Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh game, I don't think the offensive line has been as bad as people make it out to be. And I don't think it's necessarily something that you need to, well, again, I guess the run block, I see you rolling your eyes. I think obviously the running game might have a lot to do with the offensive line.
I was just thinking the New Orleans game you probably should include in that one, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll give you that one just for the sake of moving along.
Go ahead.
For me, I'm not so sure. I've always, for the last couple years, I've been just banging the table to get this defensive line to the point where it needs to be, or to the point where Dan Quinn had it in Seattle, or to the point where, we have the defense that we need here. And in order to do that, you got to invest high resources in the draft, because we've talked about, they don't have the financial flexibility really to really go all in and fix it in free agency. And even going that route, it's not, history shows it's not a recipe for success. So for me, I want to see them go D-line in rounds 1 and 2. The way the class is setting up, I think you have to go D-tackle with that first round pick, because if you miss, I think that's where the bulk of the good D tackles are going to go at this point in time. So if you miss there, you're looking at a scenario again where you're not getting, a multi-talented player that can serve in the pass and against the run. So for me, D tackle in round 1, D end in round 2, and then probably double dip there on 2 offensive linemen in rounds 3 and 4. So that's where I would want to see it. But we know that's not what's going to happen, just because Falcons kind of like to throw his curveballs a lot and go in different routes and mix it up and make it even. And it doesn't seem like within the first, 3-4 drafts that they like to go heavy on one particular area of their roster. So, but that's where I would go.
I should preface this by saying, in an ideal world, the Falcons will be able to get some D tackle help in free agency in my sort of idealized fantasy world. So I'm not going to necessarily prioritize D tackle, although from everything I've heard, it's a pretty good D tackle class that's going to be pretty deep into day two and whatnot with some talented players. So there may be an opportunity at that point to get a quality player. But for me, first round, I go D end, get that edge rusher that can be, the more reliable bookend to attack McKinley. Second round, I'd probably go offensive tackle. I feel like you need to start planning on the eventual replacement of Ryan Schrader, and I think you have to prioritize that if you're going to get a guy that's going to be able to come in and you suspect will be able to be a quality starter come 2020. Then I think you have to take that guy as high as possible, and I think that's round 2 is probably the ideal situation for that. Third round, I'd probably go. I'm for rounds 3 and 4, there's 3 positions that I want to address, but I can only address them with 2 spots. I know there's a possibility the Falcons might get a 4th round compensatory pick. So I guess just to cheat a little bit on this question, I will assume that they will get that 4th round compensatory pick. So I guess for rounds 3 through 4, in some order, I would go D tackle, wide receiver, and offensive guard. I feel like you need to get your compliment to Calvin Ridley now, sooner rather than later, because unlike a lot of people, I don't think Julio Jones is going to play more than, or I don't expect Julio Jones to play more than 2 more seasons in Atlanta. And I feel like at that point, Calvin Ridley's going to take over. And I think, much to my chagrin, I think Mohamed Sanu will be back next season, but I am like 99.9% confident that he will not be back in 2020. And when you get to that 2020 point, you'll have a 31-year-old Julio and a Calvin Ridley and not much else at your wide receiver position. And so you need to get that number 3 guy that can be the number 3 guy in 2020. And then if Julio Jones is gone or diminished in 2021, that guy can sort of step up and be that number 2 guy by then. So you want to get that guy, and the ideal point to get that guy is in round 3 or 4. The guard position, it's not that you can't get quality zone blockers in the middle portion or later in the draft. It just depends on the draft class, and not every draft class is that way. Some draft classes you can get a Forrest or a Dan Feeney or Joe Tooney type player in those middle rounds and whatnot, and plug that guy into being a starter. Whether this upcoming draft class is one of those draft classes, I have no idea, but let's just for the sake of argument assume it is. And then, of course, you get the D tackle and to go along with Grady Jarrett and Deidre Sinat, and get that guy that could be a little bit more of a pass rusher, but also be able to play a little bit more of that 3-down role. Has a little bit more upside as a pass rusher than I think Sinat does, but that's the ideal mock draft if we're doing it right now for me.
Can we just cancel the show now? I mean, Julio Jones, 2 more years.
Look, I mean, he might play longer, but I just think, like, my issue with Julio Jones, and again, this is not a knock on Julio Jones. I love that man with the bottom of my heart, but like his body's going to start breaking down at some point. I just don't think you can really
Where's the evidence of that, though? He's been healthy for the last several years. I mean, he's had little nicks, but
okay. He's been healthy. No, he's played. He hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been healthy in like 4 years.
All the talk heading into the season where he said he's never felt better. He's been 100%.
And then, like, 3 weeks into the season, he's missing Wednesday practices.
Again, I don't know what to make. I don't want to make too much of the Falcons injury reports and stuff. I mean, they could be playing the Seattle game. I mean, Dan Quinn could have picked up Pete Carroll's little tendencies as far as that stuff goes to, I don't know, get a competitive advantage or whatever. Or again, it could just be veteran maintenance days. For me, I think
kind of the point.
Right, to keep his body, I mean, good. So, and I think a lot of what he did with Terrell Owens in the offseason was geared towards the longevity. I mean, obviously, if there's one reason to go to Terrell Owens, it's for what he did for the length of his career, as far as keeping his body in tip-top shape, producing at a high level the way he did into his mid to late 30s. I think he did all that with that in mind. So to hear we only got 2 more years of him when he's having arguably, touchdowns aside, because that's ridiculous talk. I mean, he's having one of his better seasons right now at 29, 30 years old. I just don't see him slowing down. So that's why I'm shocked to hear that you think 2 years it's it for him. So
I just know
because he's not like your typical receiver too. I think obviously that's the age where you start to wear down. I mean, we saw it with Roddy White, but Julio Jones isn't your typical receiver. I mean, the term generational gets thrown around too much, but he is a generational player.
That is true. No, but look, I've seen it happen time and time again with wide receivers. When they hit the wall pretty hard. And yes, Andre Johnson was the same way, but by the time he got to age 32, 33, he was not the same player that he was. And I think if you're the Falcons, to me, the biggest mistake the Falcons made, or not the biggest, one of the biggest mistakes the Falcons made under Mike Smith was they never really developed wide receivers. They never drafted wide receivers. They drafted, 3 in these 7 years that Mike Smith was the head coach of the Falcons, when the NFL average at that point would have been to draft 7 or 8 guys over a 7-year period. And we've done a better job of that under Dan Quinn by drafting 4, but really 2 of those guys are special teams guys with Gage and Fuller. They don't really have, in my opinion, upside to be reliable options on offense in their futures. And so, they basically wasted Justin Hardy's rookie contract, and he's probably going to walk after the season. And they need to get this pipeline going of wide receivers because Sanu's not going to last forever. And again, I think even if Julio's playing until he's 35, I think at a certain point when he's 31, 32, he's probably going to start to hit a wall, and these nagging injuries that he sustains every single season and has consistently sustained for every year of his career, except for maybe 2012. And even then in the playoff game, he got hurt that year. It's one of those things where those injuries are going to start to mount and be a little bit more, or require a little bit more maintenance, so to speak, moving forward. It's going to be harder for him to gut through those injuries at age 31 and 32 that he has at age 26 and 27 and whatnot. So I think the best strategy for the Falcons is to keep a young pipeline of talent coming in this roster, particularly with Matt Ryan, who's going to play another 5 to 7 years, and not be stuck in the same situation that the Falcons were in 2015, where because Roddy White and Harry Douglas and all these guys fell off of a cliff after a certain point, and they didn't have a young pipeline of talent, they had to get stuck relying on guys like Leonard Hankerson and a rookie and Justin Hardy and Nick Williams, and all of a sudden, and that situation was brought about because the Falcons did not develop young wide receiver talent. So I think wide receiver, much more so than running back, is a position that you should be drafting a player probably every year, and if not every year, then every other year. And the Falcons need to start getting some young wide receivers in here to develop, especially since they basically punted on Justin Hardy. He could have been that guy had they developed him over the last couple of years, but for various reasons that I'm sure we have argued about over time, you can guess that they weren't successfully able to do that. So I think they need to get that guy in next year. Obviously, I'm probably going to be the only person on the planet thinking that because, the Falcons are going to do stuff, but
we'll see. And that's why I said, I want them to just go trench players. And I don't expect them to do that because I think what this staff has done a pretty good job of is they do seem to spread the wealth in their draft classes. And again, they don't, overexert their resources in one particular area. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do that either, because again, we've seen them, draft the last 2 years running backs. I guess 3 of their 4 classes, they've drafted running backs. They've drafted the 3 receivers you talked about. They drafted 2 tight ends. So they have continuously tried to stockpile the offense with skill players. So I see that trend probably continuing against my better, wishes. But, again, I think a receiver, day 3 receiver, fine, but to take a day 2 receiver after taking one in round 1, I just think this team, again, we talk about the window and the team talks about the window and they don't view it as just a 1-year thing, but we do only have so many more years with Matt Ryan, and I think they do have the pieces around him right now. They just need to build that defense up where he doesn't have to carry the team week in and week out. So that's kind of why I think pushing that off for a year wouldn't be the worst thing in the world either.
Fair. Look, knowing the Falcons, they'll take a linebacker in round 2 or something like that. You're like, ugh.
Yeah.
So look, we'll see what happens. I just think I agree with you. I think getting the defense up to par makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think a 3rd round, whatever, is going to be, in all likelihood, is going to be a major difference maker moving forward. It's like, oh, that player, that 3rd round pick that we had, like, another Dejan Sanat. Well, that winds up being the difference. That was the final piece we needed to get this defense puzzle solved. I think for the most part, after the first 2 rounds, by and large, any other player that you will wind up drafting, you can easily find in free agency a equally talented player. That doesn't mean necessarily that you don't draft players after that point, but I'm just saying, like, if they need a pick-me-up, then there are other avenues.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's why I'm saying rounds 1 and 2, you draft the difference makers on defense, and then rounds 3 and 4 is you preparing for the future at offensive line, and then whatever you do beyond that point is for depth purposes, and that's my strategy, and that's why I agree with you. I don't think a 3rd or 4th round D tackle, like, again, is going to make a difference, but if you do hit home like they have been in rounds 1 and 2, or at least round 2 hasn't been that great, but you hope that changes. But that's why I'm saying the difference makers need to come on defense with the first 2 picks, and then your next couple picks is preparing for the future with that offensive line. So,
okay, I'm sorry. I just saw a gif of Ted Cruz being a creep on Twitter. Sorry, I got distracted. Anyway, yeah, no, look, it's hard to sit here in November and be like, we should do this and we should do this, because we're sort of speculating about generic positions as opposed to specific players. You may get to the draft and be like, oh no, like the guard talent is day 2, not day 3, or the wide receiver talent is day 3 and not day 2, or whatever the case may be. And so we'll find that out in the next couple of months, and I'm sure we'll keep on talking about it. But as for tonight, that is our show. We appreciate everybody for tuning in for an extra long episode and sending in your mailbag questions. If you want to send in questions for next week's show, you can do so by using the hashtag Falcons mailbag. You can tweet at me. I'm at FalcFans. You can tweet at the show at Falcons PFC. You can even tweet at Matt. He's at Matt Karoly. You can find his work at Rise Up Reader. Be sure to check us out on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Pro Football Central YouTube page. Hit that bell icon so you know when you get those updates for when we go live. Of course, like us on Facebook, Falcons Central Radio there. Check out all of our stuff at profootballcentral.com. If you're looking for the working iTunes link, you can find that on the show's Twitter page, pinned to the top at Falcons PFC. Matt, let the people know what you're up to on Rise Up Reader and elsewhere.
Yeah, so I've been doing a monthly mailbag piece myself, where usually I'll take 2 questions from anyone, and then I'll write about a question of my own that's probably the most compelling topic. This month I'll probably talk about the NFC playoff picture moving forward and the schedule of its teams and what needs to go right for the Falcons to make the playoffs. So that'll be coming later this month on Rise Up Reader. So tweet me your questions. Just tweet at Matt Karoly, MattKaroly, or use hashtag Matlanta mailbag I've been using. So whatever you want to send me questions my way, and I'll answer them on Rise Up Reader.
Yes. Matlanta mailbag shorter than the other hashtag, but
yeah, and again, I've kind of ditched the hashtag even in itself. And when people ask me questions, be like, "Ooh, that's an interesting one. I'll write about that." So yeah, feel free to send them my way, and catch that at Rise Up Reader.
There you go. Well, guys, we appreciate you tuning in for this extra long episode. We'll be back next week. I can't make the habit of promising when we'll be back because we tend to move these things around. But we will definitely be back next week to talk about this Browns win and also preview the Cowboys game. So look forward to that. We appreciate you guys and rise up. I guess I don't know how to sign off the show.